You are not tired because life is hard. You are tired because your mind has been trained to waste strength on the wrong battles. It has been trained to react instead of choose, to consume instead of build, to soothe instead of solve, to wait instead of move. Every day you tell yourself that you need more time, more clarity, more confidence, more energy. And yet the real theft happens long before any result appears. It happens in the silent commands running under your choices. It happens in the thoughts you never question because they sound like you. It happens in the tiny moments when you obey an internal script that was written by fear, repetition, comparison, and survival. That is why this hits so hard. Most people are not losing because they are stupid. They are not losing because they are incapable. They are losing because they are following instructions they never agreed to. Instructions that say stay safe, stay small, avoid embarrassment, buy relief, delay the real work, check the phone again, call it research, call it rest, call it timing, call it bad luck, call it anything except what it is. Mental automation, invisible programming. A private system that quietly pushes a person back into the same weak patterns until failure feels personal, even when it is actually mechanical. That is the nerve this book touches from the first second. On the cover it says, "Your mind is programmed for failure." Next to it, the line says, "How people rewrite their thinking and start winning." Not in a soft way, not in a polished self-help voice, not with fake comfort. It comes at you like a mirror held too close to your face. It says the reason your life still feels heavier than it should may have less to do with effort and more to do with the code controlling where that effort goes. Look at the world people are living in right now. A person wakes up and the first thing that reaches them is not their own mind. It is a screen, notifications, news fragments, money worries, emails, short videos, messages, sales, noise. Before breakfast, attention has already been broken into pieces and sold to 10 different systems. Before work begins, the nervous system is already chasing stimulation. Then the day moves faster than the person can think. AI tools write, summarize, design, schedule, answer, automate. Some people are learning how to use that leverage. Others are watching from the side, feeling the pressure without building the skill. Everyone can feel the ground shifting under work, money, and status. Everyone feels they should be adapting faster. Everyone feels a little behind. And when people feel behind, they do something dangerous. They become easier to control. They stop choosing from principle and start reacting from emotion. They let urgency replace direction. They scroll because it feels like relief. They spend because it feels like control. They plan because it feels like progress. They compare because it feels like information. They overthink because it feels like responsibility. This is how a person can be active all day and still move nowhere. This is how someone can look busy, feel overloaded, and still build nothing that compounds. The book argues that failure rarely begins as a dramatic collapse. It begins as obedience. Obedience to mental defaults that feel normal because they have repeated for years. A person says, "I need pressure to perform." That sounds harmless. Underneath, it means I only move when pain becomes unbearable. A person says, "I work better at the last minute." Underneath, it means I have trained my brain to depend on crisis chemicals. A person says, "I deserve a treat after a hard day." Underneath, it means I keep using spending as emotional anesthesia. A person says, "I need more information first." Underneath, it means I am hiding in preparation because action would expose me to judgment. This is why the title is brutal. Your mind is programmed for failure does not mean you are doomed. It means your current mental system is producing outcomes that look personal, but are actually patterned. It means your inner world has been conditioned to protect the familiar, even when the familiar is draining your future. It means there are commands inside you that fire automatically when growth demands discomfort. Do not stand out. Do not risk being seen trying. Do not start until it is perfect. Do not raise your standard because then you might have to maintain it. Do not build slowly because slow looks unimpressive. Do not hold cash because something shiny could make today feel better. Do not focus deeply because deep focus exposes what you have been avoiding. Most people never notice these commands because they do not arrive like commands. They arrive like moods, excuses, preferences, personality, bad timing, low energy, and realistic thinking. That is what makes them powerful. A person does not say, "I am betraying my future for short-term comfort." They say, "I am just tired." They do not say, "I am avoiding the work that would change my life." They say, "I am waiting for the right moment." They do not say, "I am feeding my anxiety with endless content and comparison." They say, "I am staying informed." They do not say, "I am leaking money through stress, impulse, and image management." They say, "Everything is expensive now." Everything is expensive now. That part is true. In 2026, the pressure is real. Groceries feel heavier. Energy costs bite faster than people expect. Subscriptions stack quietly until they become a tax on passivity. Convenience has become so normal that people barely notice how often they pay to avoid friction. Delivery fees, app fees, small upgrades, auto renewals, a premium version of everything. And when mental discipline is weak, every one-tap purchase becomes a vote for the version of you that cannot tolerate pause, effort, or planning. Money leaves fastest when the nervous system is hungry. The book keeps returning to one idea that feels simple at first, and then starts following you everywhere. Your attention is not just mental energy. It is spendable life. Where attention goes, behavior follows. Where behavior repeats, identity hardens. Where identity hardens, results stabilize. That means attention is not a lifestyle topic. It is a wealth topic. It is a confidence topic. It is a character topic. A distracted person does not just lose time. A distracted person loses the ability to generate proof. And without proof, the self starts decaying. Confidence drops because the mind keeps seeing unfinished loops, broken promises, and delayed action. This is one of the sharpest moves in the book. It separates feeling from evidence. Most people think confidence comes first, and then action follows. The book flips that. Confidence is often behavioral proof remembered by the nervous system. It is the internal memory of keeping your word when it would have been easier not to. It is what remains after enough moments of self-command. Not self-praise, not self-talk. Self-command, the act of giving yourself an instruction and watching your body obey. Sit down. Start the task. Close the tab. Keep the money invested. Do not buy the thing. Send the email. Learn the skill. Make the call. Finish the work. That sounds almost too basic until you realize how many adults have lost the ability to do it consistently. They can follow a boss, a deadline, a client, an alarm, an external rule. But alone, without applause, without fear, without pressure, they drift. They say they want a stronger life, but most of their day is negotiated by appetite. The book calls this borrowed command. A person who only functions when forced does not own their direction. They rent it from pressure, and pressure is an expensive landlord. It charges energy, peace, health, and dignity. So what is the rewrite? What does it actually mean to mentally reprogram yourself? The book does not treat it like magic. It treats it like replacing code that once kept you safe, but now keeps you weak. That code is made of repeated associations. Discomfort means danger. Silence means boredom. Discipline means restriction. Missing out means loss. Spending means reward. Being visible means risk. Rest means escape. Busyness means importance. The rewrite begins when a person stops treating these associations as truth and starts treating them as inherited instructions. That is a major difference. Most people live inside thoughts. This book teaches a person to stand above them, to hear a mental line and ask, where did that command come from and who does it serve? When the mind says avoid the hard conversation, the person learns to hear it not as wisdom, but as a protective script. When the mind says check your phone for a second, the person learns to hear it as an attention leak. When the mind says you deserve to relax after this stressful week, the person learns to ask whether the planned relief will actually restore strength or simply postpone responsibility while draining more money. The rewrite is not about becoming emotionless. It is about stopping emotion from having automatic authority. That matters because most losing behavior is emotionally logical in the short term. Impulse spending makes sense when the day has been crushing. Avoiding difficult work makes sense when the task threatens your ego. Procrastination makes sense when the first step feels humiliatingly small. Staying silent makes sense when you are afraid of looking foolish. Buying a status symbol makes sense when you feel invisible. None of this is random. It is an attempt to regulate emotion. The problem is that emotional regulation without strategic awareness becomes self-betrayal. The book uses a phrase that lands hard: financial self-betrayal. That is when a person knows what strengthens them in the long term and still keeps choosing what weakens them in the moment. Not because they are broken, but because a deeper script is chasing relief, image, or permission. They say they want savings, but their spending is really trying to purchase mood. They say they want freedom, but they keep avoiding the patient systems that create it. They say they want more income, but they do not protect enough focused time to build rarer skills. They say they want peace, but they keep living in a way that requires constant escape. This is where the book becomes more than psychology and starts touching money with real force. It says most bad financial behavior is not just bad math. It is identity leakage. A person buys the expensive thing because their self-respect is unstable. A person jumps between schemes because their patience is weak. A person refuses to invest in useful tools or learning because their future self does not feel real enough to deserve present sacrifice. A person undercharges because internal permission is low. A person stays in a shrinking role because they fear temporary incompetence more than long-term stagnation. A person works hard but never builds leverage because they confuse being occupied with becoming valuable. That last one is lethal in the current era. In 2026, hard work alone is even less protective than people think. AI agents are already taking chunks of planning, drafting, organizing, research, support, and repetitive execution. People who learn how to direct these systems can multiply their output. People who refuse to adapt can remain busy while their market value stalls. The gap is not just technical, it is psychological. One person sees change and thinks I need to start learning in public, even if I am clumsy. Another sees change and thinks if I cannot master it quickly, I would rather not expose myself trying. Same world. Different mental code, different future. The book is ruthless about the cost of protecting the old identity. It says many people do not have an effort problem. They have an identity loyalty problem. They stay loyal to the version of themselves that others already understand. The one with the same jokes, same limits, same habits, same excuses, same spending patterns, same relationship with distraction, same fear of being called different. They say they want change, but only if their social world can digest it without resistance. That is why real improvement often feels lonely before it feels strong. Not because growth is tragic. Because your old environment had a role for you, and your new standards do not fit that role. This is why the rewrite has to happen at the level of permission. Internal permission. Permission to be less available. Permission to be in learning mode. Permission to look ordinary while building something real. Permission to not chase every trend. Permission to hold cash instead of displaying lifestyle. Permission to outgrow emotional spending. Permission to become less entertaining and more effective. Permission to disappoint the version of you that lived for immediate relief. So the rewrite starts with interruption. Not external interruption. Internal interruption. Catching the script between trigger and obedience. That moment is tiny, almost invisible, but the entire book turns on it. You feel the pull to avoid. Pause. You feel the urge to spend. Pause. You feel the reflex to scroll. Pause. You feel the fear of beginning badly. Pause. This pause is not passive. It is the first act of regained authority. It is where a person proves that the old instruction can be heard without being followed. At first, that sounds unimpressive. Then you realize entire lives are shaped by how often people fail to create that gap. A person sees a hard email and instantly switches tasks. A person feels insecure and opens a shopping app. A person senses boredom and reaches for short-form content. A person feels behind and starts consuming advice instead of doing the one difficult thing that would reduce the gap. Trigger. Obedience. Trigger. Obedience. Years pass like this, and the person calls it personality. The book says no. This is conditioning. Conditioning can be rewritten, but rewriting means replacing, not just resisting. Most people try to stop bad habits by white-knuckling them. That rarely lasts because the old behavior served a psychological function. The book says if distraction gave you relief, you need a stronger relationship with deliberate recovery. If spending gave you control, you need a better system that makes control visible through numbers, buffers, and plans. If busyness gave you self-worth, you need proof based on completed outputs, not visible activity. If comparison gave you direction, you need metrics that belong to your own path. If fear of judgment kept you small, you need repeated exposure to being seen imperfectly and surviving it. This is where the language of mental code becomes useful. The book is not saying a person should chant new affirmations and hope for a new life. It is saying code changes through repeated evidence. A new command becomes believable when the body lives through it enough times. Focus is safe. Starting badly is survivable. Saving money feels stronger than spending it. Deep work is more satisfying than scattered stimulation. Learning a valuable skill is worth temporary embarrassment. Saying no does not equal loss. Missing out on noise creates room for gains that actually count. Calm is not emptiness. It is available power. One of the strongest ideas in the book is delayed identity change. People expect to feel different before living differently. The book says it often works in reverse. First, the behavior changes. Then the proof accumulates. Then identity catches up. You do not feel like a disciplined person and then start acting with discipline. You act with discipline in small moments so often that eventually your brain can no longer argue with the evidence. You do not become financially solid by waiting until you love budgeting, patience, or delayed reward. You become financially solid by making enough calm decisions that your self-image updates from scattered spender to controlled builder. That matters because many people quit too early in the rewrite. They say, I tried being focused, but it still felt unnatural. Of course it did. Old code feels natural precisely because it has been repeated more. Familiar does not mean true. Familiar does not mean useful. Familiar does not even mean comfortable anymore. Some people are living inside patterns that make them miserable, but they keep defending those patterns because misery that is known can feel safer than uncertainty that might actually free them. The book is especially sharp about comfort. It says comfort is no longer a reward in modern life. It is a market. Everything is designed to remove friction, shorten effort, and hand your impulses an instant path. Food appears in minutes. Entertainment appears in seconds. Validation appears with refresh. Shopping appears with one tap. Advice appears non-stop. Even productivity can be made to feel like consumption through endless systems, templates, tutorials, and workflows that never become practice. If a person has not trained resistance, the environment will slowly convert them into someone who cannot tolerate boredom, uncertainty, or delayed payoff. That person may still look functional, but inside they are easier to steer, and a mind that is easy to steer is expensive to own. It costs money because every urge becomes a possible transaction. It costs time because every discomfort becomes a cue for escape. It costs confidence because every broken promise leaves residue. It costs income because the person rarely stays with hard skill building long enough to become truly useful. It costs self-respect because deep down the person knows they are being ruled by impulses they no longer admire. That is why the book keeps linking discipline to dignity. Not in a cold, punishing way. In a clean, stabilizing way. Discipline means your future is no longer being negotiated by every mood that enters the room. It means your standards start deciding what happens next. It means you do not have to trust motivation because your system already knows what to do. Motivation is volatile. Standards are structural. Motivation asks, do I feel like it? Standards ask, is this what I do now? A person with weak standards keeps renegotiating with themselves. A person with strong standards makes fewer emotional bargains. This changes confidence in a way that empty inspiration never can. A lot of people keep trying to think their way into stronger self-belief while continuing to live in ways that create internal doubt. The book will not let that slide. It says if you keep lying to yourself in small ways, your mind records it. If you keep saying tomorrow and then repeating today, your mind records it. If you keep calling distraction recovery, your mind records it. If you keep treating financial chaos as normal, your mind records it. And the result is not just poor performance, it is weakened self-trust. Self-trust is one of the hidden currencies in the book. People talk about money, confidence, opportunities, networks, and skill. But beneath all of that is the question, can I rely on myself when it matters? Someone with high self-trust walks into hard tasks differently. They make decisions faster. They stay calmer under uncertainty. They recover from mistakes without collapsing. They can hold a long-term plan without needing emotional reassurance every 2 hours. Why? Because they have behavioral proof. They have seen themselves follow through often enough that the mind stops panicking every time discomfort appears. And this is exactly where the financial transformation becomes practical instead of abstract. A rewritten mind handles money differently because it is no longer using money to patch internal instability. It does not need constant reward purchases to survive the week. It does not buy status to borrow self-worth. It does not chase random opportunities because fear of missing out is running the show. It does not sabotage saving because patience feels like deprivation. It does not jump into risky moves simply because the pressure to catch up has become unbearable. It can sit still. It can plan. It can endure the slow periods where no one claps and nothing looks dramatic. That ability to sit still is more valuable than people realize. When inflation pressure returns and energy bills rise and daily expenses feel slippery, panic becomes contagious. Some people respond by numbing themselves and pretending numbers do not exist. Others respond by chasing fast money stories because reality feels too tight. The book says both reactions come from the same place, a nervous system that cannot face discomfort directly. The stronger move is less emotional and more powerful. Look directly. Cut what weakens you. Build margin. Build skill. Protect attention. Increase usefulness. Reduce leak points. Stop seeking emotional rescue through financial noise. The phrase leak points appears again and again because the book treats losing as leakage before collapse. A person does not suddenly destroy their focus. They leak it through constant checking, open loops, and unguarded inputs. A person does not suddenly wreck their finances. They leak them through daily softness, untracked subscriptions, emotional spending, poor thresholds, and refusal to face numbers. A person does not suddenly lose their self-respect. They leak it through tolerated sloppiness, postponed truth, and repeated surrender to lower impulses. Winning starts when leakage becomes visible. Once you can see where life is draining, you can finally stop romanticizing the drain. There is also a sharp warning in the book about performance. Not high performance, performed performance. Looking productive, sounding ambitious, talking in future tense, posting goals, sharing plans, organizing systems, watching endless educational content, discussing ideas like someone already living them. This is one of the most dangerous modern traps because it feels so close to progress. It is socially rewarded. It looks intelligent. It sounds proactive. But if the behavior is not producing finished work, stronger habits, more control, or real assets, then it is theater. The person is acting like a builder while remaining a spectator. You can see this all over the place now. People use AI tools to generate polished plans, clean summaries, professional-sounding outlines, even personal strategies, and then do nothing with them. It creates a new version of false progress. Synthetic momentum. The mind gets the satisfaction of structure without the strain of implementation. The book cuts through that fast. It says the modern world can now manufacture the feeling of advancement at industrial scale. If you do not demand behavioral proof from yourself, you can spend months living inside generated clarity while your real life barely changes. That is why the book insists on proof. Behavioral proof. Financial proof. Focus proof. Not fantasies, not plans, not identity statements. Proof. Did you protect an hour of real concentration? Did you stop the unnecessary purchase? Did you finish the hard task before entertainment? Did you learn something applicable and use it? Did you build a reserve? Did you reduce one leak? Did you raise one standard? Did you keep one promise to yourself that your old code would have broken? These proofs look small, but the brain does not grade them by drama. It grades them by repetition. Repetition is how programming got there. Repetition is how it leaves. Most people want one insight powerful enough to save them. The book says no insight can outrun a daily system that keeps reinforcing the old self. If your phone still controls the first hour of your morning, if your spending still changes with your mood, if your focus still breaks every 10 minutes, if your evenings still disappear into recovery that never restores you, then inspiration will evaporate on contact with routine. The rewrite must enter the day. It must touch mornings, work blocks, purchases, conversations, rest, and the small decisions that normally pass without inspection. Then comes work. And here the book becomes almost surgical. It says most people underestimate how emotionally loaded real work has become. Not fake work, real work. The kind that requires concentration, judgment, patience, uncertainty, and visible output. In a world trained by fast feedback and endless interruption, real work now feels heavier because it denies the brain constant stimulation. It asks for depth. It asks for delayed reward. It exposes what you do not know. It forces you to meet your current level without filters. No wonder so many people unconsciously run from it. The escape does not always look lazy. Sometimes it looks responsible. You answer messages quickly. You clean up minor tasks. You check one more article. You refine the system. You optimize the environment. You prepare the perfect prompt. You gather more examples. Hours pass, and the central task remains untouched. The book says this is not harmless. Every time you circle the important thing instead of entering it, you train avoidance. Your brain learns that discomfort leads to detours, not confrontation. Over time, even simple important work starts generating more resistance because you have taught yourself that the feeling of difficulty is a cue to leave. This is why the rewrite places such importance on starting before you feel ready. Not recklessly, not carelessly, but before emotional permission arrives. Because waiting to feel ready keeps authority in the hands of the old code. The old code is never excited to do the thing that threatens its control. It wants more comfort, more certainty, more polish, more delay. If you keep waiting for alignment, you stay obedient to the very system you are trying to outgrow. A rewritten mind handles readiness differently. It treats readiness as something built through entry, not granted in advance. It understands that the first 10 minutes of resistance often contain more false danger than real danger. It knows that action clarifies faster than rumination. It knows that courage is not a personality trait reserved for dramatic people. It is the repeated decision to move while your internal noise objects. The same pattern applies to money. People keep waiting to feel financially in control before behaving like someone in control. They want confidence before tracking numbers. They want extra income before becoming precise. They want certainty before building reserves. They want a perfect strategy before reducing waste. But the book says financial calm often comes after consistent control, not before it. You get calmer by handling money more cleanly, by noticing where it goes, by removing softness, by creating space between urge and purchase, by building a basic system that stops the mind from living in vague stress. Vague stress is a major enemy in these pages. When numbers are unclear, the mind fills the gap with low-grade anxiety. That anxiety then seeks relief, often through the very habits that worsen the situation. More convenient spending, more small escapes, more avoidance, more fantasy. The book says clarity itself can feel painful at first because it removes denial. But once numbers are named, they lose some of their power to haunt. Precision is emotionally stabilizing. A person who knows their reality can work with it. A person who keeps reality blurry stays easy to scare and easy to soothe. This matters even more now because digital money feels frictionless. People tap, swipe, subscribe, upgrade, split, auto-renew, and move on without emotional weight landing in real time. The book argues that friction is protective, healthy friction, a pause before purchase, a rule before commitment, a waiting window before lifestyle expansion, a review process before keeping a recurring expense. Without that friction, modern financial life becomes a smooth highway for emotional impulses wearing the mask of convenience. The book is not anti-comfort and not anti-enjoyment. It is anti-unconsciousness. It does not say never spend. It says know what the spending is doing psychologically. Is it supporting life, energy, and meaningful experience? Or is it purchasing relief from boredom, insecurity, emptiness, comparison, and fatigue? Those are different transactions, even if the checkout page looks the same. A rewritten mind does not ask, only, can I afford this? It asks, what version of me is trying to buy this, and what feeling is this purchase trying to regulate? Then it moves to standards, personal standards, financial standards, behavioral standards. Standards sound boring until you realize they decide more than motivation ever will. A low-standard person says this month got messy. A higher-standard person says I do not let mess become mystery. A low-standard person says I know I should focus more. A higher-standard person says I do not let entertainment enter before the main work is done. A low-standard person says I waste money sometimes. A higher-standard person says I do not use spending to escape feelings I should learn to face. Standards reduce debate. That is their power. When a person has weak standards, every situation becomes a fresh argument with themselves. Should I start now? Should I buy this? Should I skip this session? Should I look at my accounts later? Should I keep scrolling a little more? Weak standards create constant negotiation. Stronger standards turn repeated decisions into settled ground. That saves enormous mental energy. The book presents this not as rigidity, but as freedom from internal chaos. And then there is comparison. Algorithm-driven comparison. One of the most corrosive forms of mental programming in the current era. People spend so much time watching edited competence that their own unfinished work starts feeling pathetic. They see polished creators, louder earners, fitter bodies, better rooms, cleaner systems, smarter commentary, younger success stories, public wins, and monetized confidence. Day after day, the nervous system absorbs the message that everyone else is moving faster. This does not always create motivation. Often it creates paralysis, a background feeling that no effort will look impressive enough, so why expose yourself to the proof that you are still becoming? The book cuts into this with a hard truth. Comparison steals twice. First, it steals peace, then it steals action. You lose emotional stability, and then you lose the hours that would have improved your reality. That is why attention must be defended. Not because the internet is evil. Because unguarded comparison quietly rewrites personal standards in a destructive direction. It makes patience look like failure. It makes invisible progress feel worthless. It makes ordinary improvement seem too small to matter. A person exposed to enough distorted comparison starts despising the slow, honest path precisely when that path would save them. A rewritten mind handles comparison differently. It treats visible success not as a verdict on personal worth, but as information to filter carefully. What is signal? What is theater? What is useful? What is irrelevant? What was bought with years you did not witness? What is only designed to trigger appetite? What belongs to a different game entirely? This protects more than mood. It protects decision quality. Because people make terrible financial and career choices when they are trying to erase the feeling of being behind. That is where status chasing enters. The book is brutal with it. It says many people are not buying objects, they are buying temporary relief from invisible shame. A nicer phone, a nicer watch, a nicer trip, a nicer setup, a nicer look. Not because it fits a stable plan, but because they cannot bear the identity sensation of seeming ordinary, delayed, or less impressive than people they compare themselves to. That is expensive insecurity. It produces short spikes of image and long stretches of pressure. A rewritten mind sees status traps faster because it is less dependent on external signals to feel whole. This does not mean becoming detached from ambition. In fact, the book is fiercely pro-ambition, but it redefines ambition as durable self-expansion, not public display. Real ambition builds capacity, skill, income reliability, leverage, reputation earned through proof, emotional stability under pressure, stronger attention, cleaner habits, better judgment, greater ability to create value in changing conditions. Display ambition buys the appearance of movement without the substance. One compounds, the other drains. Leverage becomes another central idea. A losing mind thinks only in hours and emotion. A rewritten mind starts thinking in systems, assets, tools, and repeatable outputs. It asks, what can I learn once and use many times? What can I build that keeps serving me? What can reduce future stress instead of only treating today? What skill grows more useful as the market changes? What tool increases output without increasing chaos? What relationship between effort and result am I designing? This is a huge shift because it moves the person from endless reaction toward architecture. Architecture matters because life gets heavier when it is rebuilt from scratch every week. The book says a lot of people keep depending on willpower because they have not built structures that make stronger behavior easier. They rely on memory instead of systems, mood instead of rules, hope instead of plans, frictionless apps instead of intentional barriers. A rewritten mind starts designing for weakness instead of pretending weakness will disappear. It removes temptations from the obvious path. It automates basics. It protects blocks of time. It limits open loops. It creates visible cues for the behaviors that matter. This is not glamorous, it is effective. Effective starts looking attractive once a person gets tired of emotional drama. That is another strong undercurrent in the book. Many people are addicted to internal drama without realizing it. The pressure, the panic, the last-minute scramble, the crash, the promise to do better, the temporary surge, then the relapse. This cycle creates intensity, and intensity can feel like life. But it is not progress, it is instability mistaken for meaning. A rewritten mind starts preferring steady force over dramatic bursts. It values consistency not because consistency sounds noble, but because consistency is how real compounding enters the room. Compounding is not just financial in this book, it is psychological. Every kept promise compounds. Every ignored impulse compounds. Every focused hour compounds. Every avoided waste compounds. Every skill session compounds. Every calm decision under stress compounds. Every time you refuse to obey the old code, the new self gets stronger. The results may look small at first, which is why many people quit. But the book keeps pressing this point. Almost everything people admire later once looked too minor to be exciting. That is exactly why most people never stay with it. The old code hates slow, visible progress because it cannot use it for immediate identity pleasure. It wants fast emotional returns, fast proof, fast change, fast relief. That is why get-rich-quick fantasies remain seductive even when people know better. The fantasy is not just about money. It is about skipping the painful middle where identity has changed in action but not yet in obvious status. The book says this middle is where serious people are made, quietly, without spectacle, without public validation, without the emotional sugar rush of looking transformed before being transformed. This ties directly into discipline, not the harsh performative kind, the clean kind, the kind where your day starts reflecting your priorities more than your impulses, the kind where your bank account starts reflecting your standards more than your moods. The kind where your work output starts reflecting focus more than scattered effort. The kind where your future stops depending on whether you feel inspired this week. That kind of discipline is not punishment. It is released power. It is a reduction of internal friction. It is your life spending less time arguing with itself. The book also spends time on courage, but not as a heroic trait. It presents courage as permission to remain present while your protective programming complains. That is relevant everywhere. Learning a new tool while younger, faster people seem ahead. Speaking up in a meeting when you are not fully polished. publishing your work before your ego feels protected, negotiating more money, setting a harder boundary, admitting a financial mistake, looking at the numbers, starting a second stream of income with no guarantee of quick payoff, saying no to consumption that would keep you trapped. None of this feels cinematic in the moment. It feels awkward, exposed, and inconvenient. That is why it changes lives. A losing mind makes an agreement with comfort. It says, keep me safe from discomfort now, and I will ignore the cost later. A rewritten mind makes a different agreement. It says, let me face the right discomfort now so I do not pay compound pain later. This is one of the deepest financial lessons in the whole piece. Pain delayed becomes expensive. Avoiding numbers becomes debt pressure. Avoiding skill building becomes career fragility. Avoiding honest work becomes stagnant income. Avoiding focus becomes mediocre output. Avoiding boundaries becomes time loss. Avoiding small sacrifices becomes large dependence. Dependence is a powerful word here, because many people think they want freedom while building lives full of invisible dependence. Dependence on mood, dependence on outside pressure, dependence on convenience, dependence on social approval, dependence on constant novelty, dependence on being entertained, dependence on future rescue, dependence on the idea that somehow they will become different without repeatedly doing different things. The book says freedom is not a vibe. Freedom is expensive to build and cheap to lose. It requires self-command, margin, skill, and standards. Without those, people keep calling comfort freedom while living in private captivity. This is why the emotional tone of the book becomes sharper as it goes on. It stops talking to the reader like someone who needs cheering up and starts talking to them like someone who is capable of command. That shift matters. Too much modern motivational content treats people like fragile children who need soothing language before they can act. This book assumes the opposite. It assumes the reader is exhausted not from being pushed too hard, but from living below their own awareness while calling it normal. It assumes they do not need more comfort phrases. They need a clearer confrontation with the patterns draining their life. And the confrontation is deeply personal, because almost everyone can recognize themselves in at least one of the hidden scripts. The person who keeps waiting for a feeling that never arrives. The person who confuses research with action. The person who scrolls to recover and ends up emptier. The person who spends after stressful days. The person who wants more money but refuses the discomfort of becoming more useful. The person who says they have no time while leaking hours into fractured attention. The person who keeps trying to improve without changing the environment that keeps defeating them. The person who wants a new future while protecting the identity built for the old one. There is a line of thinking underneath all this that becomes impossible to ignore once you feel it. The mind does not care about your goals nearly as much as it cares about familiar patterns. If familiar means inconsistent, distracted, reactive, image-driven, or financially loose, then that is what it will keep reproducing unless interrupted. Goals live in language. Programming lives in repetition. That is why people can sincerely want one life and keep waking up inside another. The body follows the stronger signal. Repeated behavior is the stronger signal, so the rewrite must become repeated behavior. That is where the book becomes strangely hopeful without ever becoming soft. It says you do not need to become a different species. You need to build a different pattern. You do not need to feel powerful all the time. You need to stop obeying weakness automatically. You do not need perfect discipline. You need enough moments of self-command to prove that the old pattern no longer has total authority. You do not need some giant breakthrough. You need repeated exits from the loop. Loop is the key word. Most losing is looped. Same fear, same delay, same soothing habit, same regret, same promise, same repeat. The book argues that what people call a bad year is often a bad loop stretched across 12 months. And a new life often begins as a broken loop repeated enough times that identity finally notices. That is why small wins matter. Not because small wins are cute, because small wins interrupt loops. They say the old command fired, but this time I did not fully obey. Imagine what that means over time. A month where you do the hard task before opening the noise machine. A month where you track spending without looking away. A month where you say no to emotional purchases more often than yes. A month where you let boredom exist without feeding it instant content. A month where you use AI tools to multiply real work instead of simulate movement. A month where you spend less time explaining your goals and more time proving them. That month would change the way you see yourself, not because of fantasy, because evidence would start collecting in your favor. The book never hides the fact that this is difficult, but it also refuses to dramatize difficulty into tragedy. Hard does not mean wrong. Uncomfortable does not mean harmful. Slow does not mean failing. Invisible does not mean useless. Boredom does not mean absence of life. Financial restraint does not mean deprivation. Focus does not mean losing freedom. These are all misread signals from a mind trained by overstimulation and immediate reward. The rewrite is partly a correction of interpretation. You learn to stop reading every uncomfortable feeling as a stop sign. That alone changes confidence. Because anxiety often grows when the mind keeps mislabeling normal growth pain as danger. A person sits to work deeply and feels friction. The old code says something is wrong. A person begins learning a new system and feels clumsy. The old code says you are not cut out for this. A person tries to save more aggressively and feels temporary tightness. The old code says life is shrinking. The book teaches a more accurate reading. Friction means adaptation is happening. Clumsiness means the skill is honest. Temporary tightness means a new standard is being installed. Discomfort is not always damage. Sometimes it is rewiring. Rewiring becomes visible in surprising ways. The person who used to panic when alone with their thoughts becomes better at silence. The person who used to need constant stimulation becomes capable of steady effort. The person who used to spend whenever they felt low becomes able to sit through the feeling without turning it into a transaction. The person who used to need urgency to work starts creating before pressure rises. The person who used to fear looking average while learning begins valuing competence more than image. These are not random upgrades. They are signs that authority is moving from impulse to intention. And once intention begins winning more often, money starts behaving differently too. Not magically, cleanly. The emotional leaks shrink. The person notices recurring waste. They become more selective about subscriptions, upgrades, convenient spending, and status traps. They stop saying yes to everything that offers temporary relief. They start seeing cash not as unused pleasure but as stored options. They begin valuing margin. Margin in time, margin in money, margin in attention, margin in energy. Because margin creates power. A person without margin is always easier to pressure, easier to sell to, easier to distract, easier to break. That last part is huge. Margin is not boring. Margin is strategic freedom. It means one bad week does not become chaos, one surprise bill does not become panic. One market shift does not erase your ability to think. One difficult season at work does not force desperate decisions. The book treats margin as emotional strength made visible in practical form. People who worship appearances often neglect margin because margin looks unimpressive. But when the world tightens, the person with margin can think while others react. That difference changes lives. The same applies to skill. The book repeatedly pushes the reader toward becoming more useful, not merely more informed. In a market reshaped by automation, usefulness matters more than noise. Can you solve real problems? Can you direct tools instead of just consuming content about them? Can you communicate clearly, judge accurately, build patiently, adapt under pressure, and keep learning without collapsing into identity panic? The person who develops usefulness becomes harder to replace and easier to trust. That trust becomes opportunity. Opportunity becomes income. Income handled cleanly becomes options. Options protected by standards become a stronger life. But the path there is not glamorous. And this book never pretends otherwise. Skill growth is often repetitive. Attention control is often boring. Financial order is often quiet. Long-term thinking is often invisible. This is exactly why many people miss them. They want transformation to feel dramatic. The book says real transformation often feels like less drama, not more. Less internal bargaining, less spending to feel okay, less chaos, less fake urgency, less dependence on external pressure, less need to look impressive, more control, more direction, more stability, more proof. Stability can sound dull to a culture addicted to stimulation, but this book makes stability feel fierce, because stable does not mean passive. Stable means hard to manipulate. Stable means your emotions no longer own every decision. Stable means your standards survive bad days. Stable means your work continues even when the mood is wrong. Stable means your finances are less exposed to random appetite. Stable means your self-respect is not rebuilt every morning from zero. That is not dull. That is formidable. The book also deals with self-respect in a way that feels almost physical. It says self-respect is not maintained by compliments, identity slogans, or public performance. It is maintained by the private relationship between your instructions and your obedience. Every time you watch yourself fold too quickly, something inside you weakens. Every time you hold the line, something strengthens. This is why seemingly small acts matter so much. Closing the app, doing the work, telling the truth, keeping the budget. Finishing the set, sleeping instead of numbing, leaving the money alone, starting again without drama. These acts are building or eroding self-respect in real time. That is why the book feels like an awakening rather than a manual. It is not handing out generic life advice. It is exposing the mechanics of self-abandonment and then showing how to reverse them. It keeps asking, who are you obeying when you betray your own future? The impulse, the fear, the shame, the comparison, the version of you that still thinks relief is the same as safety. Once you see that clearly, the old excuses start sounding thinner. Not because you become perfect, but because you become less fooled. And that is a form of freedom. Not freedom from all struggle. Freedom from confusion about what is happening inside you. When the old script says skip the work, you recognize avoidance. When the old script says buy the reward, you recognize emotional spending. When the old script says consume more advice, you recognize delay disguised as preparation. When the old script says who do you think you are, you recognize identity defense. Naming the pattern weakens its spell, not instantly, but reliably. The book never asks the reader to hate themselves for having this programming. That would just be another trap. Shame can expose a problem, but it rarely builds a stable solution. Instead, the tone is more demanding than that. See it, own it, interrupt it, replace it, repeat. Not because you are broken, because you are responsible now that you can see the mechanism. Responsibility is heavier than blame and more useful. Blame points backward. Responsibility points to the next act. The next act is where winning begins. Not with mood, not with the perfect plan. With the next act. The cleaner purchase, the focused hour, the honest look at the numbers. The message sent, the skill practiced, the tab closed, the bedtime honored, the cheap dopamine refused, the standard upheld, the environment adjusted. The old identity disappointed. This is what the book means by starting to win. Not applause, not instant wealth, not visible domination, quiet command accumulating into undeniable change. And once that change starts, the person becomes different in ways other people can feel before they can explain them. Their speech changes because excuses lose emotional weight. Their work changes because attention stops leaking as fast. Their money changes because relief spending loses some of its grip. Their confidence changes because they stop needing fantasy to feel movement. Their standards change because they have tasted the peace that comes from cleaner living. Their relationships change because they become less available for chaos, comparison, and low expectation. Their future changes because they are finally building from the inside out, instead of reacting from the outside in. This is where the book becomes almost confrontational about time. It asks, how many more years do you want to hand to a version of yourself that has not earned command? How many more mornings will start in reaction? How many more purchases will be made by stress? How many more nights will dissolve into low-quality escape? How many more months will be spent collecting information instead of proof? How many more times will you say you are serious while protecting the habits that make seriousness impossible? The question is harsh because the stakes are real. Programming does not just shape days, it shapes decades, and the world is not slowing down to give people extra time to stay confused. Work is changing, tools are changing, competition is changing. The cost of scattered attention is rising, the value of clear thinking is rising, the premium on useful skill is rising, the emotional tax of always feeling behind is rising. If a person does not learn to govern their own mind, the market, the feed, and the mood will gladly do it for them. That is the hidden urgency in the book. Not panic, urgency. The clean recognition that a distracted life is becoming more expensive every year. This is why the middle of the narration feels less like advice and more like an invitation to revolt. Not against the world, against automatic obedience, against the internal commands that have been masquerading as personality for too long, against the weak agreements you keep making with comfort, image, and delay, against the habit of asking your feelings for permission to do what your future requires, against the financial softness that keeps turning your income into vapor, against the fractured attention that makes you feel busy while remaining easy to outrun. If that hits, then it should. Because almost everyone has felt the shame of knowing better and still doing worse. Almost everyone has felt the strange gap between what they want and what they repeatedly choose. The book says that gap is where the rewrite belongs, not in theory. In repetition, in daily proof, in smaller, cleaner choices that eventually become a new internal law. A new internal law sounds intense, but that is exactly the point. The old law inside many people is this: avoid pain now, explain consequences later. The new law is different. Face the right pain now, reduce consequences later. Old law, protect comfort, sacrifice growth. New law, protect growth, tolerate temporary discomfort. Old law, spend for relief. New law, build for freedom. Old law, wait for mood. New law, obey standards. Old law, seek image. New law, seek proof. Old law, follow impulse. New law, direct attention. Once these laws begin to settle, life stops feeling so random. The same events still happen. Stress, setbacks, confusion, slow periods, mistakes, awkward phases, financial pressure, learning curves, external noise. But the person is no longer processed by these events in the same way. They respond from architecture, not just emotion. That changes everything. A bad week no longer becomes a bad identity. A tough month no longer becomes reckless spending. A slower season no longer becomes surrender. The nervous system becomes less dramatic because it trusts the structure underneath it. Because look around. Most people are being trained to live in fragments. Fragmented attention, fragmented priorities, fragmented identity, fragmented finances, fragmented effort. This book says winning starts when fragments are gathered under command, when attention is reclaimed, when spending is aligned, when standards stop moving, when action stops waiting for emotion, when identity updates through proof. That is not a slogan. It is a practical revolution in how a person lives inside their own mind. And if this recognition is landing deeper than most things do, that is because it is probably naming something you have been feeling for a long time without fully framing it. That sensation that you are not lazy, not incapable, not doomed, but somehow still caught. That feeling that you know more than your results show. That quiet frustration of watching yourself leak time, money, energy, and respect through patterns that seem stupid 5 minutes after you obey them. This book speaks to that exact wound. It says the prison was not a lack of desire. It was a trained pattern of obedience. Break that obedience and the future starts rearranging itself. Not instantly, not theatrically, but unmistakably. The morning gets cleaner, the work gets deeper, the spending gets sharper, the attention gets stronger, the self-talk gets less indulgent and more accurate. The standards stop collapsing under pressure. The old identity starts losing votes. And then one day, the life that used to feel out of reach starts looking less like a dream and more like the natural result of no longer betraying yourself every day. That is the core force of this whole message. Winning is not reserved for people with special genetics, perfect timing, rich parents, endless energy, or effortless confidence. Those things can help, yes. But a shocking amount of losing comes from mental code that keeps pulling a person back to what is familiar, low, and immediately soothing. Rewrite the code, and you do not become superhuman. You become aligned. Your choices stop fighting your stated goals. Your money stops serving your worst moods. Your attention stops being available to everything. Your life stops moving in two opposite directions at once. If you have recognized yourself in this, then do not brush it off and move on to the next distraction like it was just another interesting video. Let it stay uncomfortable for a minute. Let it expose something. And if you want me to go even deeper into mental discipline, money habits, identity change, and focus in the AI era, leave the word rewrite in the comments so I know this hit where it needed to hit. If this message put language to a struggle you have been carrying in silence, press like. Not as a gesture, but as a marker that you are done pretending this pattern is normal. And subscribe if you want to keep building a mind that can hold its ground in a world designed to break concentration and sell your impulses back to you. Because the real danger was never just failure. The real danger was becoming so used to hidden self-sabotage that you started calling it who you are. The real loss was not money alone. It was command. Command over attention, command over standards, command over action, command over the private choices that shape public outcomes. That is what this book rips open. It shows that most cages do not look like cages when you have lived inside them long enough. They look like routine. They look like personality. They look like realistic thinking. They look like harmless habits. They look like small purchases. They look like one more scroll. They look like tomorrow. And the real victory begins at the exact moment you stop obeying the version of yourself that was trained to lose. Not when the world applauds. Not when everything gets easier. Not when fear disappears. The victory begins when the old command fires and you do something different. When the urge says escape and you stay. When the stress says spend and you pause. When the doubt says wait and you begin. When the comparison says shrink and you keep building. When the mood says later and your standards say now. That is the first unlocked door. Walk through enough of those doors and you do not just change your habits. You change your relationship with power, personal power, financial power, attention power, the power to direct yourself in an age that profits from your fragmentation, the power to keep building when everything around you is optimized to scatter you. The power to become someone your future can depend on. That is what winning looks like before it becomes visible to anyone else. So remember the title and let it sting until it becomes useful. Your mind is programmed for failure, not as a sentence of defeat, but as a diagnosis of what must be rewritten. And remember the line beside it, how people rewrite their thinking and start winning. That is not about hope floating in the air. It is about command earned through repetition. It is about the day you stop asking your old programming for permission to live differently. It is about the moment you realize the voice inside you that always chose comfort, delay, image, and relief was never your highest self. It was old code, and code can be changed. The prison was automation, the escape is authorship, the loss was obedience, the gain is command, the old life was reaction. The new life begins the second you decide that your mind will no longer be a place where fear writes policy and impulse signs the budget. Let weaker patterns complain. Let the old identity panic. Let comfort withdraw its approval. Keep moving, keep proving, keep replacing the script. Because once you stop obeying what trained you to lose, you finally become dangerous to everything that depended on your passivity. And that is where winning really starts.